Hi everyone, can you hear me? Yeah, so I'm delighted to be here with you today for this sixth and final seminar of the series that has discussed um, widening access to higher education in a number of ways, thinking of institutional initiatives, more local initiatives that look at disabilities and lifelong learning. As we know, if we want to widen access and success, we have to think of it in a very plural, multiple uh, fronted way, because just as exclusion happens in a variety of ways, micro and macro, also to counter that, we need to come and make alliances in all the ways that we can. And our session today, our seminar, will be focusing specifically on uh, policies to widen access and success in higher education. And we'll be talking from the Brazilian perspective, also Canadian perspective, and Chinese perspective. And we'll be talking about regional disparity. We'll be talking about tuition barriers and quotas as well. So there's so many ways and many fronts that we can tackle and try to expand um, our higher education community, really. So I'll start talking a bit about the work we've been doing here in the Ministry of Education in Brazil. And then we'll move on to Yang Deng, who will talk about China's strategy to address regional disparities. And finally, Dale Kirby will talk about tuition waivers in Canada, in Newfoundland. So I'll start and I'll see if I can share my screen. And you tell me if you see my screen again. If I can have thumbs up here. I'll put you
That's
to the
very nice.
side. There. So I've been working in the Ministry of Education in Brazil now for 14 years, first as a consultant and then as permanent staff. I'm a PhD graduate from the University of Toronto. I did my master's and my PhD there. And I worked with basic education for 10 years here. And then the last 4 years, I moved to the Department of Quality Assessment in higher education. So today I'll share with you three initiatives that we've had here in Brazil since the 90s to widen access to higher education. We're talking about a federal loan that was launched in 1999. And then we'll move on. Well, we'll actually talk about them together. They kind of show how our thinking about widening access as well as the Ministry of Education, really, as the federal government has sort of evolved from the 90s, where it was a more meritocratic neoliberal perspective to a more left-wing government in the last couple of decades. So we'll talk about comparative results from the loan that started in 1999, and then the federal bursary that started in 2004, and finally the quota law for reserving spots for vulnerable groups in federal institutions that was created in 2012 and then modified a couple of years ago. And the idea here, and this is kind of a premise really, is that we've developed a lot in terms of widening access to previously excluded groups, but there's still a long way to go. And that's part of what I'll be showing you and sharing with you. And part of my lens here, I draw from work from philosopher Jane Roland Martin. I was one of the main authors I used for my dissertation a million years ago. And she has this series of works in the 80s, really thinking about the ideal of a liberal education. And she was particularly talking about education of girls and women. And, but, just a lot of things apply to other excluded groups. And today I will not be talking about girls of women. And part of the story is that fortunately, for the results that I have to show today, which will be about concluding and conclusion of higher education and results in standard tests, women and girls do better than their male counterparts. But there's something about the framework that, colonial, decolonial theory, standpoint theory, so many of our diversity theorists have shown apply to different vulnerable groups. And then particularly, I'll be talking about three aspects, or just seeing the lens of three aspects of exclusion that Martin organizes as being first. You cannot enter, so you're formally prohibited from entering. And then a second part, there's a rejection of attributes. Well, we will allow you in, but we don't really like you, and you have to just fend for yourself and find a way to keep up. But we don't really like you here. And then the third one, which is, well, we can come in and do well, but we don't want to talk about your success. And she argues that for education to be inclusive, we cannot stop in just allowing people that were previously excluded. They have to be allowed, but also their attributes have to be valued, welcomed, and celebrated. And I'll show a little bit how this works in the context that I'll be talking about for the Brazilians landscape. So just to give a few numbers, Brazil had as 2024 a population of 200 million. 10% of those are young people from 18 to 24. We had a national educational plan that expired last year, and we're just waiting for the new one to be released very soon. But the goal for 2024 would be that 50% of the population between 18 and 24 would be in higher education or graduated from higher education, and of all ages, and at least a third in the right, the proper, the match rate. And we haven't really reached either of those goals, although things improved a lot in the last couple decades. So you would think that the problem was that, well, there are just not enough spots for everyone. But that's not the case. As this graph shows, the light bar is from 2010 to 2024, the number of spots in higher education that were made available. And as you see, the orange line shows how many graduates we had in each of these years. And the problem was we are not being able to draw young people to higher education. So now we have spots for everyone and more. So we have like 23 million spots. We saw that we have about 22 million young people. So we have spots for everyone, but we're not attracting young people, and the people that come are not graduating. So the number of graduates went from just under a million into 2010 to 1.3 million. So the focus has to shift from just offering more spots to how can we make sure that people are successful. So I'll talk a little bit in the time that we have, and I could go on hours and hours about this, but I'll just move very quickly through lots of graphs to think about how these three programs to widen participation in higher education have been successful in terms of completion rates, in terms of performance indicators, like, okay, you can come in, but is the education that is being offered as good? And also how success is defined, because that's something else, especially as policymakers, we have to discuss and think about. So the three initiatives that we're talking today, first, the two initiatives to help with funding private education. The blue one are federal loans that started first. So here's some money. It's a meritocratic framework. So here's some money, you pay us back, but at least you can get to pay your way through higher education. The red one came later and it's more stable through the years, as you see here, the numbers from 2014 to 2024. But still, it's under 5% of the population that goes through private higher education in Brazil. And we also talk a bit about the quotas that are exclusively for our federal institutions. And what our law says is that at least 50% of all spots provided by federal institutions have to be reserved for certain groups. And as you see, and that was outrage when the quota law came because, well, we don't have enough spots, and now you're reserved for people who, because of no fault of their own, they're not qualified to join higher education. You see that to this day, we haven't yet reached the 50% mark. And we have, as I've shown you, tons of free spots available. So quotas are not taking the spots from anyone who's qualified to go and attend tertiary education. So talking first about graduation rates, they're appalling. These graphs, they show the cohort that entered higher education in 2015. Where are they 10 years later? And in total in Brazil, 39% of those who entered in 2015, remember these are an average 4-year courses. 10 years later, less than 40% have graduated, 60% have dropped out, and 1% is just lingering. No one really knows. They haven't really officially dropped out, they haven't graduated, they're just there. It's worse in the private sector, especially because you have to pay your way through. It's a little better in the public sector with 44% of graduation rate and a 3% lingering rate. If we think of the programs we talked about, starting with the ones to help with tuition for private education, we see that private was a little worse, but it gets even worse for those who do not have either the loan or the bursary. So those who have a loan, 53% of those had graduated 10 years later, and no one was still attending, especially because they had to pay a loan back. And 59% had graduated from those who had bursary. Again, the 60% graduation rate isn't great, but that's the best number that we have across all the groups. It's for those who got a bursary to attend private higher education with no need to pay back afterwards. When we look at the quotas, so 59% was our best case scenario, and the public total was 44%, but the general public, we had a higher dropout rate for the general public, and for the public that came in through reserves, through quotas, so instead of 44%, we had 49%, which again, we thought we were talking about 10 million people in Brazil. That is significant. It's not great, but something tells us that, wow, the brilliant people who are not as qualified, blah, 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 they're just hanging there more than the people who are supposed to be well labeled and provided for. But then the other question is, yeah, they go in, but how good? What kind of performance do they have? Like what kind of knowledge are they getting from their education? And that it is, as it is the case in Brazil, public institutions are much more prestigious. So the expansion of the sector came, from massification. So through the private sector, 80% of our enrollment is through the private sector, and the public sector does better. In Brazil, we like standardized tests. They came in the 90s with PISA and they just expanded in all sorts of ways. And nowadays we try to say, no, we're all autonomous and we can do as we please. But it's hard to remove standardized tests in Brazil. And one of those tests that we have is ENADE, and it's mandatory for in cycles for all students graduating. So we have a 3-year cycles to cover the courses with most enrollment. And it's on a scale from 1 to 100. So again, um, the average is 48, which isn't all great. It's just below 50%. But the public sector does a bit better with 54% across all fields, right? And there'll be a difference in fields. And the private sector comes, 8 points beneath that. But when we just segmentize and see how that fares, so we have the light gray here is our overall national average of 58.3. We see that public is better with 54.5 EA, but Pro-Uni, which is our loan, which did better in graduation, also comes really close to the grades for the public, which are the most prestigious, and they went to private institutions. We see that blank doesn't want to declare what kind of funding, and in Brazil, this is very representative, but that's a topic for another talk. They don't want to say, but they do well. Those who went and got loans from their own pocket did quite well too, so above our average. And those who got a federal loan are here just not significantly higher from those who are self-funded in the private institutions, but still not worse off. We see other groups that are not quite on par. So you can say that the loans did okay, the bursaries did much better, and reserving spots for private prestigious institutions was also not at all disastrous as it was anticipated. Much on the contrary, it's been a huge success. But still, we have to look at disparities and tons of vulnerabilities that are still there. For instance, as it comes to performance, we know that the public institutions do better. But when we compare with the ones that came in through quota, so our national average is here in the light gray, 58. If you came in because of race or ethnicity, you did a bit better than average. If you came in because there was a reserve because you came from public schooling, you did even better. We saw that our Pro-Uni recipients did well. If you combined at least two of these criteria, you did much better. But still, those who came in with no reserve, so those who didn't fit any of our quotas, came at 54.8, which is just slightly above. It's not like statistically significant, but it is significant that it is above the public average. But I find it just fascinating that if you combine vulnerabilities, you see how much harder these people that have been granted a spot and say, "Come here, we want you." How well they're doing, thinking of all the things that they have to go and fight against. So just to summarize, I'd say that these initiatives are a success in terms of completion rates and performance. If you think, especially in the private sector, our bursaries, and in the public sector, quotas that serve people in multiple vulnerability groups at the same time, but still, dropout rates are huge, structural racism is still there, most prestigious courses are still mainly white, public finances for private institutions is kind of oxymoron and strange, and people with disabilities still prefer to go to private institutions because they're better catered there. And you think, well, but shouldn't public be for everyone? Isn't that the motto? And I won't discuss these graphs here, but so that you have an idea, this shows how stratified by race these here are the loans, so medicine here, so 65% of the recipients are white and 35 are not white, and then in decreasing proportion until nursery where it's the opposite. If you see for the bursaries is a similar situation. More prestigious courses have a higher percentage of white population. least prestigious, and we have here primary teachers are mainly not white. So just a little bit about disability, and I started to split all these results by these groups, but no time for it today. But so that you know, these are their numbers, and this is what they say, the dark blue being what they found in the public institutions versus the light blue, the private. So, can I find Braille in private or public? Can I find translation to signal language and tactile material and things like that? They're all in the private institutions and not in the public. And so to conclude, we've done a lot, but we still have to think of our paradigm. And going back to Martin, this is one of the titles of her articles back in the 80s. So here's the picture we had 20 years ago and now. So 20 years ago, we didn't have enough seats for everyone who wanted. Nowadays, we have the seats, and young people do not want to come, and those that come don't stay. So we have to think that perhaps it's time to think of what it is that we are providing and why aren't we inviting enough and attractive enough. And Martin goes on and on, drawing from Dewey and all the binary thinking dichotomy of mind, body, and reason and emotion, and so on, to think about the ideal of a liberal education as an ivory tower that has no connection with the outside world, and how important it is to move from an alienating to a more integrative a perspective that brings into the center the body and the emotions and the earth and the planet and the other, and manual labor and caring. And all these parts of the binaries have been associated with vulnerable groups. So maybe vulnerable groups don't want to come because they find that higher education is not giving the tools that they need to the actual world that we live now. And now with artificial intelligence and TikTok and YouTube, if we want to provide something that is rich and meaningful, we have to think how higher education has not only to invite and welcome and celebrate, but also change to be more in touch with most of our population and with the needs that we need for the earth, for belonging. And we have all these different ways to think about global citizenship and planetary citizenship, and lots of ways to think of the public good that moves from the ivory tower ideal to a more varied and diversified way to think of how we make connections and cross bridges, so that our young people not only have something to draw from higher education, but also bring all their talents and riches and cares to make it richer for everyone. Thank you. And I'll stop here. Are you still with me?
Thank you very much, Ester.
Good. So I'll stop sharing, and I'll invite to follow that. I'll invite Yang Deng from Yunnan Normal University, and she'll talk about China's strategies and results for addressing regional disparities in higher education. Thank you, Yang.
Thank you.
We move to Dale Kirby from the Memorial University of Newfoundland and the Atlantic Canada Tuition Waiver Working Group. And the title of this talk is Tuition Waivers and Holistic Supports, Advancing Equity in Access for Care Experienced Youth. And in the meantime, if our audience would like to drop your questions in the Q&A, we'll have some time for taking at least some of those at the end of Dale's talk. Thank you. It's with you, Dale.
Thank you. Can you see the slide here? Okay. Thanks for the opportunity to present on our research. So I'm at Memorial University of Newfoundland in Canada's most easternmost province, where last month in February we got 176 centimeters of snow. I'm not sure how much we had so far this month, but it's been the most snow we've had in 5 years. So I'm I guess, a partner with the Atlantic Canada Tuition Waiver Working Group. And this is an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary research group, which has been looking at tuition waiver programs for youth who have experience in the child welfare system. So in state care, foster care, there are different ways people refer to it. And these tuition waiver programs have been becoming more and more prevalent. So we wanted to look into what's happening there, how it enables access, and so on. First of all, I just want to point out that our research is funded by the Canadian federal government through our Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. We initially got a grant for 3 years. As many things slip, and we're now in the 5th year of the 3-year project. Just to show you where we are, so you see Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm in the place that says St. John's there, so I'm pretty far east. But this includes 10 institutions across the 4 Atlantic provinces: Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. And they're mostly universities, but a couple are what the OECD would call tertiary type B, so community colleges, we call them in Canada. Why is this important? Well, first of all, we've got about 85,000 care experienced youth in Canada. Many of them come from marginalized, minoritized, otherwise disadvantaged backgrounds. They experience a variety of educational barriers. They're less likely to complete high school, thereby less likely to complete higher education or post-secondary education. Often the first in their family to go to higher education. They experience more unemployment, homelessness, food insecurity. They don't have the family-based social and emotional support that many of their peers do. They have more intersections with the criminal justice system, unfortunately, and poorer health and social outcomes. So it's an important group to study. Now, I'm not going to go over this in detail. I just want to assure you that there is a sort of a theoretical framework in the background of our work that's based on Bronfenbrenner's ecological model of education systems. I guess the thing to take away here is that the learner is interacting with a variety of different systems at different levels. If you think about, say, government being up here and the learner being at the center, and then everything in between, the school, the community, etc. So the study has had several different phases. We first did an international scoping review. The results have been published in the International Journal of Educational Research, Open. We then did, in phase 2, in-depth interviews, and that was recently published in the journal called Youth. We're currently at the tail end of the phase 3, which is this digital storytelling component where former youth in care and individuals who work with them are sort of doing their video sort of narratives of their experiences with tuition waiver programs and similar programs. So phase 1, the scoping review, we wanted to look at barriers to access to higher education for care experienced youth, specifically in OECD countries. And we wanted to learn how these types of programs can reduce barriers for former youth in care in Canada. So the studies were all English language because we're all English, even though we're a bilingual country. But peer-reviewed studies from OECD countries, that's what we selected as the group of studies for the scoping review, research on care experienced youth in higher ed, and then we looked at tuition waiver programs or any other related financial support programs for former youth in care. In the end, was whittled down to 58 peer-reviewed studies. As with many things with higher education research, at least in my wheelhouse, most of them are studies that were conducted and published based on research in the United States, 83%. Limited evidence from other OECD countries, and they reported on a variety of different demographics. They were mixed method studies, quantitative, qualitative, et cetera, et cetera. So what do we find in the scoping review? Well, obviously, the waiver of tuition or the bursary for tuition helps, but there are other barriers that these youth also face. We did find that these youth who were in receipt of the waiver were 3.5 times more likely to graduate from a higher education institution, but still their graduation rates were lower than their peers who didn't have any child welfare system experience. We found that there's still needed financial supports, needed support for housing and transportation, other types of social and academic supports, which I'll get into in a little bit. Mental health services or need for counseling and emotional supports. Many of these young people have trauma in their lives that we hear more and more about, sort of trauma-informed care, trauma-informed research. Many youth in care, or some youth in care at least, will they'll switch schools. Sometimes they'll have different carers, different caring environments, whether it's a group setting or a family setting, and so on and so forth. And they have traumatic experiences that remain with them and challenge them as they try to negotiate their way through higher education. And that's a good reason why we need to train higher education staff to be able to work with these young people and help them transition, persist, and succeed. We also found in the literature need for mentoring and advising as early as possible in secondary school or earlier to help these care experienced youth in care to transition to higher ed, to see it as something that they would do themselves to promote that connectedness, graduation from secondary school, and then the transition to post-secondary. They need consistent adult support. As I said, they don't have sort of family support that many of us do. And also to normalize help seeking, that it's okay to ask somebody for support, for help. Again, some minoritized, marginalized groups, racialized groups are proportionately spend more time in state care. Black youth, Indigenous youth, and particularly we see this in Canada, and other disadvantaged groups. So there's a need to have a sort of a equity-focused approach to have culturally relevant supports and address stigma and racism and so on. Phase 2, so we did in-depth interviews next. We wanted to see what the key features of the tuition waiver programs in our region are, sort of assess how they reduce barriers, and to see how success is defined and measured, and how should it be defined and measured. And then how can these programs be improved? We did 31 interviews with the recipients. So 10 of them were tuition waiver recipients. They were youth themselves who had gone to college or university. But the other participants were either higher education institutional staff who worked with those young people, or they're community-based professionals. So we're talking social workers, case workers, people work with in different aspects of the child welfare system for government effectively, and community agencies funded by, sort of not-for-profits and government-funded agencies and so on. So we had 5 themes that I'll go over. At least I've sort of shrunk it down into 5 themes for here. But as you can imagine, there's a lot in this research. So one of the things, again, I always say, obviously, it seems obvious to me, but we're doing this research for about 30 years now in terms of access to higher education. While the tuition waivers are helpful for care experienced youth to access higher education, they still have other costs, right? The books, transportation, housing, food. If you don't have funding for those things, then you go without, or you have difficulty persisting, attending, and just sort of maintaining yourself while in higher education. So supports need to reflect the full cost of attending. And as we've done the interviews, this is something that repeatedly come up, whether it's from the youth themselves or from those who are supporting them, is that they have financial costs beyond the waiver. While the waiver is a great thing, it isn't everything. The need for holistic and wraparound support. So, the financial support works best when there are other supports. So these students need academic advising, coaching, academic assistance. They need mental health supports in many instances, and they need support with their just basic needs. Again, like housing, accessing housing, and so on. There's a need for a personalized, sustained support as well that goes well beyond the waiver of the tuition fees. So as we found in the scoping review, again, there are many mental health impacts that affect these students' ability to attend and to be engaged in a higher education program and to be successful in that. They may question whether they belong and experience what we call imposter syndrome. This is especially the case if they don't have a family or some significant individual in their lives who's supporting them, who doesn't have experience with attending higher education, what the expectations are. And the supports for these students have both academic and emotional supports. Again, cultural and peer supports. We found in some instances, and this is difficult to do on campus, there are in some cases, say almost like a club, sort of a safe gathering community of former youth in care who sort of get together and compare notes about what their experiences are, sort of lean on one another, and that sort of helps these youth escape feelings of isolation and to be more confident about attending higher ed. Culturally relevant programs, again, for marginalized populations. In some instances, like there are supports specifically for students from Indigenous backgrounds, First Nations, that are helpful in helping them transition to higher education, persist and succeed. And again, this is especially important for students who are the first in their family to be attending a post-secondary program. We also heard, about the need to have dedicated point people that these youth can go to, students can go to help sort of navigate through all of the different things associated with attending a post-secondary program, the sort of administrivia and bureaucracy that's involved, the academic supports, just having someone or some place to go to, someone they can identify as being the navigator to help them get through their program, help to mentor them and support them, having a trusted individual dedicated for that purpose. see how I'm even going, not only keeping to time, but speeding through time here. I think Newfoundlanders just have a natural tendency to speak quickly, so this works really well in this context. So what does our research show? So care experienced youth face a variety of different barriers in accessing higher education. We know that the tuition waiver is not a sufficient support for them. Doesn't, for example, address the full cost of attending post-secondary education, all the other things from housing to transportation to food to so on. Interestingly enough, I was interviewing one student for this project, and it really sticks with me. The person said to me that they were working and they needed their car to work, but they couldn't afford to pay for their car and for their apartment. So for that semester, they were living in their car so they could work and go to university. So that sort of tells you the sort of challenges that this person and many of these care experienced youth experience. As I said, the need for wraparound supports, mental health supports, academic advising, having someone who's a dedicated mentor, navigator, supporter, cheerleader, if you will, just someone to help these students who frequently face more isolation or feelings of isolation than others to make it through. So we obviously need to extend support beyond the tuition to books, fees, housing, other living costs, pair that financial aid with advising, mental health services, mentoring, and other types of supports. Design the programs based on equity, sort of continuity of care, trauma-informed care, and student belonging, and then use this to strengthen institutional policies, public policy around tuition waivers for care experienced youth. And here's a whole bunch of references you're not going to be able to memorize. All the ones that start with WAHEN and go right down, those are the articles I mentioned. We published a number of pieces in The Conversation, if you're familiar with that. And my email is there, dkirby@mon.ca. If you want to get in touch with me, I can share some of the articles, sources, etc., and so on. And thanks again. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of our findings with you.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Yan. Imogen, do I read the questions in the Q&A or?
Yes, and we've also got Amelie, who's got her hand raised to ask a question. So Amelie, if that's all right, I can click allow you to talk and you'll be able to ask a question out loud. Although you are on mute currently. Okay. Perhaps Esther, you can just read the questions from the Q&A for the moment, and then we'll come back.
Sounds good. I'll start with Yan. The first question, Yan, is if there are any differences in the funding that students can receive for their studies in the Eastern versus the Western areas.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Esther. And thanks for the question about the differences in funding. Actually, in China, that I think the students in higher education, they get funding from different sources. First one is that they can get some official funding, such as a scholarship or some, I think the loan. They can get some student loan, which is equal for the students in the Western and the Eastern area. But there's another source that we do have some scholarship, which is established by some company, commercial sector. I think that maybe the Western students have less access because we in the eastern area we have the more business, so more rich people they can set up some fundings which support their maybe they graduate, they are successful alumni, they can set up them scholarship to support students from the same university or something like that. But for the student in the Western, I think this chance will be much less. Thank you.
I'll read a question for Dale then about governmental grant and bursary supports for care leavers, independent of whether or not they're in education available in Canada. In the UK, a lot of financial support pathways currently available are tied to remaining in higher education though some reforms are coming.
Yeah,
So
well,
again,
it's a complicated answer, unfortunately. Canada has 10 provinces and 3 territories, and by virtue of the Constitution Act of 1867, education is primarily a provincial or territorial responsibility for a variety of reasons. But, over 100 years ago, religion, language, geography, that the sort of founders of the country wanted it to be that way. So we have a patchwork of systems. We have 13 different higher education systems. And there's some federal involvement, but mostly provincial and territorial government involvement in supports. So it varies, I guess, is the answer to the question. But I mean, once someone reaches the age of 21, it's described as going off a cliff. Many of the supports that are provided by the provincial or territorial government ends, and then you're sort of at the mercy of the free market and whatever social supports there are beyond that. So it's not simple, and that's why these tuition waiver programs really fill in where the rest of the system lacks.
Thank you. I'll ask me one question as well. Well, one of the questions for me is whether there's data collected on student reasoning for dropping out, and not at the ministry level. We know that different institutions have their own ways of following up with students, and from what we understand, private institutions are even better at that than public ones, but not at the ministry level. We had a working group in the last couple of years trying to brainstorm ways to prevent dropout. And one of the difficulty is that we didn't have a strategy just tracking students. So the information I have for you are enrollments and dropout. So it's just the sheer number that we collect through the census. And the more qualitative answers are the ones that we ask for the graduating students when they take their tests in order to graduate. But by then it's already too late, right? We're only talking with the survivors. We don't know what happened to the ones that drowned in the system. So we have to still find ways to improve that. And we've been brainstorming ways to make that part easier. Part of the story is just benchmarking with institutions that do a good job having, just a learning group and just a good, there's tons of ways to predict dropout from vulnerabilities and using artificial intelligence to do that. But we haven't gone that far yet. The big thing is just shifting the mindset from we don't have enough spots to accommodate everyone to wow, we do, and they're not staying. So the shift has been just to make everyone in the ministry, in the institutions, realize there has been a shift, and the focus is no longer increasing spots, but in retaining and making sure our students are provided for. A question now for Yeah, and if Imogen, do you have a
I
question?
do have a question for all three of you, actually, based on something you've just said, Esther, and a conversation we had a couple of weeks ago, a previous seminar about student success, and if you think that the focus has been on student equity and access to university, and slowly people are beginning to think, oh, what is happening to the students? We've got them into higher education, and then we've said, good job, well done, our numbers have gone up. Are you, so for all three of the speakers, are you beginning to see the shift in focus into student success? So like with the loan waivers, how can we actually support success in this? Or do you think because perhaps it's a slightly more complicated, slightly harder to measure aspect, many policy institutions currently wavering on, oh, let's just get them into the university and then all is fine, all is good. What are you seeing in what you've seen? Are we beginning to shift focus onto success from purely access, or is it a long way to go before that happens? I don't know who wants to answer.
I'll start, and I'll say that senior leadership in institutions see that. The general public, no. So if I'll talk to, my family, colleagues, well-educated people who went to school with me, they will not believe that. But if you are, or even professors will not believe that. But senior leadership in institutions are concerned because the the gap is just too large. And we have deans saying that before they had to think very much what the criteria for letting people in was. Nowadays, they're just going to schools and say, come. And if you stay, that's great. And they find that the dropout rate isn't that different just because there's just so much more to compete in terms of self-learning and self-education, right? And if we want to say that, tertiary institutions and not just universities have something else to give that ChatGPT doesn't, we have to communicate it better. But so senior leadership in institutions come and say, if we don't do something, we'll have to close by 2030 because demographics is changing. The demographic boom is past, and there's just not enough people interested, and they're older and they have families of their own and they work, and the model doesn't tend to lifelong learning yet. So part of the shift is beyond thinking of vulnerabilities, we also have to think these are not students who may have part-time jobs. These are workers who want to study and advance their knowledge. And it is a shift that is still hard to make considering the way that we think of higher education. So.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in there. So I think that there's, at least here, I see a sort of a growing appreciation for the difference between traditional notions of equality versus the contemporary understanding of equity, in that, not every widget is the same. Not every person who's coming into the institution is the same, has the same, need in order to persist and succeed. Care experienced youth being one of them, right? These are students who need more supports, more scaffolding around them in order to succeed. I'll give you another example that's outside of that is persons with disabilities, right? So in the, say, grade school system, we're graduating more and more young people who have had accommodations for their learning in the grade school system. Now increasing numbers of them have moved into the higher education system. So the higher education system has grown in appreciation for the need to provide accommodations for those students as well. So I think, while some people will just look at the numbers, I think that it's really student support services has been one of the real growth areas in personnel in colleges and universities in Canada. And that's because, well, if we're going to continue to increase participation, you have to, I guess, support the diversity of the types of students who we're getting as a result of the increased participation.
Right. Okay. For me, I think I use perspective as a faculty in higher education that when we evaluate the success for higher education, that in my research, I use the number of the graduation rate. You can see that in China that the graduation rate is high, super high. Okay, but doesn't mean it's the full coverage of the success. I think no. Yeah, because the number is limited. The number just tell the one side of a story. Another side of a story for me, I think that maybe for the Eastern, Western, for the developed area, less developed area, I think that all the students have the chance to be success if we do not value them in the numbers, right? So maybe the personal growth for me, I think that maybe all the students have they have very clear targets that for their future. They begin to understand the meaning of their own life. I think successful. Okay, for me, just as a teacher. Thank you.
Do we want to bring in Amelie? Is Amelie with us?
I don't know. We do have a question from Paula in the.
Yeah, I'll read Paula's question. Is that okay, Logan? Related to government grants and bursary support question before, a question for the three of us. Do we have knowledge of whether our governments have considered implementing unconditional basic income policy as complementary measure to overcoming barriers in higher education? It could be an outcome grant once higher education has been successfully achieved and to complement reintegration to the labor market. So we're talking about unconditional basic income.
Well, I don't know about that terminology. It's not something I've heard. I mean, we hear sometimes about universal basic income, which for everyone, which we certainly have far from achieving here. There is student financial aid outside of the tuition waiver programs that I'm talking about, or I was talking about in my presentation. I mean, we have student financial aid in the form of loans and grants in Canada, and I won't bore you with the Byzantine federal provincial thing again, but there's a lot of that. I guess the waiver of tuition is a grant, is an upfront grant to a specific group of students, former youth in care, in the instance of my presentation. But many students who borrow or apply for financial assistance, they'll get some portion of their financial assistance as a grant. So it's non-repayable money, if you will, that they get, and then they have to pay back a proportion of that. I guess, whether you agree or disagree, in the literature, there's some discussion of sort of debt aversion, right? I mean, your willingness and ability to shoulder a loan that you have to pay off over 15 years or whatever, depending on your background, that can be a pretty daunting thing. So, I mean, it's really variable. I could go on and on about this, but that's just sort of some of it from my perspective. There is financial aid available, and some of it's in the form of a grant that's non-repayable, which I guess would somehow emulate what it is you're referring to, I think.
Yeah, do you want to go?
Yeah, for me, that unconditional basic income policy, we have it in China, that we have some income policy, basic income. But it's very hard for me to say it's related to the access to higher education. But we do have some policies in China that if you have some problem to pay your tuition, in to enter into the higher education, we do have some special, very, very strong support policy to get you to the access of the student loan. Okay, to ensure the access. Thank you.
In the case of Brazil, we have a policy related to basic education. So that has been in place for a couple decades now and quite successful in keeping children in school. Part of the requirement to get that kind of financial aid would be to prove that your children are going to school and getting vaccinated according to the vaccination plan. But once they're 18, that no longer applies. For higher education, we don't have something like that, although we're just in the process of shifting our national financial aid package law just around now. It is an electoral year, and that's the year that things get launched. And I don't think it includes anything like some sort of minimum basic income, but it does bring some points about beyond tuition waiver, some sort of financial assistance, also in the form of living quarters, accommodation, and food services in our institutions and things like that. So that's as far as I know about that, really. There was another question for me that I can't really answer fully about whether certain courses or subjects are more likely to receive federal loans versus bursary. Each of these have their specific rules, and they're kind of complicated because it involves whether money comes back or not. And for the loans, they're on a decrease. Part of the reason why they're decreasing is that default is really high. So now they're trying to reorganize to see where default is high and how they can cover what they would expect to keep it rolling. For the bursaries, it's different, and it goes more. For both, there is the ministry shows areas of interest, and then the institution can also say, here are spots they're willing to offer for these courses, and these are night courses, and these are evening courses, and these are distance courses, and this is what I can offer. But then for the bursaries, there's also the criteria also involves how high they scored in our national higher school, like in our SATs, and also the degree of vulnerability that they have. So it's not a simple calculation, but in theory, the course or area subject of studies are not. Not everyone is going to medicine and engineering and leaving teaching behind. Like the ministry caps, we need people in these areas, and this is the maximum that we can offer in each of the area. And then the rest will go from each institution capacity to offer it, but and also the demand. So a combination of those. And there is one for Dale. You mentioned the importance of peer groups of care experienced students. Are you seeing that students developed these themselves, or that universities are building them up, the peer groups?
Well, just quickly, just a couple of things on that. I mean, as I mentioned, the business of stigma and feeling like an outsider and so on, it's often fairly sensitive subject for self-identifying as somebody who's been in the child welfare system. So that adds a layer of complexity to it all. But I think the short answer is that where we've seen in our research where this is successful, it's supported through support services at the university, say. So, through whatever person who is working with care experienced youth in an institution. That's the person who's working with these students as individuals and then helping to organize like this sort of communal space, if you will, where there can be sort of a peer support group of youth who have similar care experience.
And we have Emily, but we haven't been able to put her mic on, and we're running out of time.
No. So I would like to say thank you to all three of our speakers and to Esther for chairing very short notice, and thank you very much, Esther. In the chat, anyone who would like, we've got all of our previous global community seminars are now up on YouTube. This one will be 2. This is the last of the seasons for WAHEN, so we will be taking a little bit of a break on events until secretly to be announced end of May, where we will be